for those that come into the country. I haven't, that was information that I have of last week. I haven't got an absolute number, but I'm more than happy to get specific data off PHE after the session, or to ask PHE to send that to you, Chair. But it's around about 20%.
So that's what, 60,000 checks being done in the community over a 5-week period, something like that?
So, Chair, as I say, I think to go beyond that, we would need to get more specific detail from PHE.
That would be really helpful. Thank you. And then ask you just about the quarantine arrangements. The Joint Biosecurity Centre that you've obviously set up has estimated that prevalence in Spain is 330 cases per 100,000, which is already nearly twice the level in the UK. You've also got cases rising quite sharply around Barcelona. If those cases keep rising, what is the threshold at which you would put Spain back on the quarantine list?
Well, I would not be involved in putting a threshold or putting Spain back on the quarantine list. As you will know, Chair, that is a cross-government decision that would be led by the Department of Health and Public Health England. So that would be in terms of the data that is provided by the Joint Biosecurity Centre, which is not, it's not in the hands of the Home Office, that is now in the hands of the Department of Health. They would look at that data, they would aggregate that, and they would work with the Department of Transport, who are responsible for the engagement with airlines and obviously doing the bilateral discussions with the Foreign Office. They would effectively pull that together, and they would set the criteria, the threshold that you've asked about, as to when any measures would therefore.
In that at all? Obviously, you announced these arrangements in the first place. Are you and the Home Office not involved in them now?
That is correct. That is correct. We are with the Joint Biosecurity Centre itself. Is not the responsibility of the Home Office. This is now in the hands of the Department of Health working with Public Health England. So we do not have responsibility for determining any thresholds around countries where we need to put in restrictions or things of that nature. These are cross-government decisions. And in fact, Chair, it's a point that I have emphasised again and repeatedly, both publicly and in other forums in the House of Commons, that these are cross-government decisions, and these are public health measures in public health regulations led by the Secretary of State for the Department of Health and Social Care.
Okay. You haven't published the Joint Biosecurity Assessment of Prevalence in Portugal. Why not?
Well, that's not for me to publish. That would be very much for other government departments, as I've just said, the Department of Health with Public Health England to organise that.
But presumably you talk to each other. What is the government as a whole's reason for not publishing the Joint Biosecurity Centre's assessment? The published data from other sources, for example, the European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control and so on, has a very different ranking of cases that might have higher rates and so on than the one that the government seems to be using. So surely the government's assessments on the from the Joint Biosecurity Centre of different countries and the risk for those different countries ought to be published.
Well, I'm sure they'll be published in due course. There is a lot of data and government information that's published day in, day out, along with SAGE advice that has been repeatedly published, SAGE papers, numbers, data. So that is very much a decision in conjunction with, I suspect, Public Health England, the Department of Health. There are mechanisms within government as to how information and data is published, and rightly so. Okay, so I can't give you the date. That is not in my remit, but it is certainly, if you would like us to go across government to find out a schedule of publication and get you answers on any specifics that you would like from other government departments, we'd be more than happy to collate that for you and share that with you.
That would be immensely helpful, given that people are booking their holidays at the moment, given that the number of cases in Spain seems to be rising. I would have thought actually people would have a right to know whether the Joint Biosecurity Centre's assessment is that they are rising up close to the threshold, for example, or alternatively that Portugal's cases might be rising down towards the threshold. If people are making big financial decisions about booking holidays, or travel agents are booking things, surely they have a right to know the scientific basis on which you, the government, are making such crucial decisions.
Well, don't forget, a lot of that information is also fed into the Foreign Office, and the Foreign Office changed their travel advice accordingly as well. And that is rightly so. As I've said, this is cross-government. It cuts across many aspects of government departments. And you're right, because public health safety is absolutely paramount. That is why a range of measures since March onwards have been put in place to protect the British public and public health. That has been at the forefront of everything this government has done. So travel advice, people go to the usual place, which tends to be the Foreign Office. And of course, there are other areas, obviously through the JBC, but obviously through Public Health England. That information helps to inform the decisions that the Foreign Office take up in terms of travel advice, but also the engagement. Let's not forget this, with the carriers, travel agencies, that all takes place through the Department of Transport, and that is absolutely the right and proper approach. We've always said this, I've made this point many, many times over recent months now, that A, this is cross-cutting across government, but also individual government departments have certain responsibilities, whether it's on data, whether it's carriers, whether it's engagement with other countries as well, on travel corridors, which obviously have come together in recent weeks through the Department of Transport. Those departments take the lead on those particular areas.
Okay, but we do expect you as government departments to talk to each other and to work together. And you were obviously the minister. You were obviously also the cabinet minister who announced these policies in the first place. So therefore, we are keen to know your view on them. Can you confirm how many people do you estimate are coming into the country at the moment with coronavirus?
Well, that I don't know. I mean, on a daily basis, the number of people coming into the country is approximately 50,000 people, and that's across all modes of transport. I don't have a figure of people coming into the country on a daily basis with coronavirus. That figure is held centrally elsewhere in government with Department of Health and Public Health England.
So there is a...
And don't forget, it does vary on a daily basis because people, as you've said, are quarantining. And if people are symptomatic, they are self-isolating as well.
But if the average prevalence for the people coming into the country was similar to that of Spain, and Spain normally will be about 40% of the cases coming into the country anyway, you would then expect that to be sort of over 100 people a day with coronavirus coming into the country. Is that accurate?
Well, it sounds to me like these are figures that are quite hypothetical. So it's no point asking me if a hypothetical figure is accurate.
Fine. No, what I'm really keen to know is what is the government's estimate? Shona Dunn told us last time in the evidence session that you had never asked for an estimate of how many people might be coming into the country with coronavirus. Is that correct?
And not correct at all. And if I go back to March, and if you recall in previous select committee hearing, as last time I came, I was very clear in terms of the actual questions that I put forward to SAGE. And Chair, you will be aware that actually it's a scientific advisor in the Home Office that had been delegated by SAGE because there was so much data and information coming into central government back in March, and rightly so, because the priority back then was to do exactly what we said we would do, which was to protect the NHS and to stop the NHS from really suffering difficulties. We were asking very clear questions about the number of people that were travelling into the country that could or did have coronavirus.
So were you given an estimate then of how many people were coming into the country or would be expected to be coming into the country with coronavirus at that time?
The estimate that we had, and bear in mind that there was, a range of data coming in, and it was difficult for the scientific advisors in particular to say that data was fully reliable. The figure that I was given, the percentage was 0.5% of people basically who were potentially bringing in cases from outside of the UK into the UK.
Okay, we went through this figure last time at our last evidence session, and you raised that last time. You said it was 0.5% of people coming into the country. In that evidence session, Shona Dunn then corrected you and said, in fact, it was 0.5% of the total number of cases currently in the UK. So can we just clarify, which is it? 0.5% of the number of people coming into the country or 0.5% of the number of cases in the UK? They're very different figures.
Yeah, sorry, it's the cases in the UK.
Okay, so 0.5% of cases in the UK, but given that we don't know how many cases there were in the UK at that time, I ask you again, did you ever ask for and were you ever given an estimate of the number of people coming into the country with coronavirus?
Well, as I've already said, it was difficult to get accurate information, and I have asked for information.
I'm just asking if you were given estimates.
No, the estimate that I was given was 0.5 at that time.
That's not an estimate for the number of people. So did you ever ask for and were you ever given an estimate for the number of people? 1,000 people, 2,000 people?
I've already made it quite clear. I've asked for it, and there are a range of numbers that I was given, but the ultimate number that I was pointed to was 0.5 in terms of the cases in the UK. And let me emphasise again, and I think, in fact, our scientific advisor has talked you through this several times in the past as well. The amount of data that was coming in was, there was a wide range of data, and I've been talked through that, as of all Cabinet colleagues at the time, was not necessarily reliable, primarily because they themselves were having to ask a range of questions about the prevalence in overseas countries, aggregating different rates, trying to effectively substantiate through different scientific means as well the data that they were getting and showing consistency in that data.
But I understand that all estimates will have been difficult to make. You're still trying to clarify. So you are now saying that you did ask for a number of people, an estimate for the number of people coming into the country with coronavirus.
Not just a number, but a percentage, an approximate percentage.
Did you ask for a number, though? Did you ask for the number of people? In addition to the percentage, did you ask for the number of people?
Numbers and percentages, because I wanted to know whether or not we therefore needed, if you recall, as I said last time round, whether or not we needed to introduce health measures at the border, because of the potential threat of people coming in and a significant number, and asking for those numbers was the right thing to do.
Okay, I'm pressing this because we're wanting to quote some of this evidence in our forthcoming report. So can I then just clarify with Shona Dunn, because Shona Dunn told us when we raised this with her in the last evidence session, asked specifically, was an estimate of the number of people coming into the country with coronavirus produced? And you, Shona Dunn, you said, I do not believe that anyone has asked for that number to be pinned down. The Home Secretary is saying she did ask for that number to be pinned down. Was your previous evidence inaccurate?
Chair, as the Home Secretary says, she's asked for a whole variety of numbers on many occasions as she's
asked for that specific number.
She's asked for a variety of numbers and evidence from our Chief Scientific Advisor on a number of occasions to make sure she could pin down the specifics of the position. And as Professor Aston has made clear on a number of occasions,
not an answer to my question, is it?
The most reliable position is the 0.5%.
I know. I understand your attachment. I understand your attachment to the 0.5%. I'm just trying to make sure that we're not factually inaccurate when we respond to the things that you've been doing. I'm still trying to clarify. You told us that nobody had ever asked for an assessment of the number of people with coronavirus coming into the country during March.
Chair, as you say, I think what I said was I was not aware of anyone having asked for a formal assessment. The Home Secretary has said that she has asked for a variety of numbers, and I entirely concur that she's asked for a variety of numbers.
But she didn't. But neither she nor you.
I was not aware that there was a formal assessment.
Okay, so neither she nor you asked for a formal assessment of the number of cases of people coming into the country with coronavirus.
That information has been requested from SAGE, and what returned was the 0.5 figure, Chair, which is the 0.5 figure we keep returning to.
So you did ask for that number.
And most rely on.
Okay, we're going round in circles here. You did ask for that number then.
We have asked for an assessment from SAGE, and the number that SAGE felt comfortable giving us was the 0.5 figure.
But did you ask for the number?
So there have been a variety of conversations with SAGE.
Okay, so it sounds not.
Them to give us an assessment, and that is the assessment that they have given us. The Home Secretary has asked for a variety of numbers, as she scrutinised this.
Okay, all I'm asking for is factual information. Okay, let's go into for the current date, for now, for figures in July. Has anybody asked for an assessment of the number of people coming into the country in July with coronavirus? And what is that estimate?
Chair, is that to me still?
I'll start with the Home Secretary. I'll come back to you if you have a different answer.
Yeah, the answer is yes, because we do have that data. We will have that assessment of people. We do have that data because we still see on a regular basis the number of people coming into the country. Now, you're specifically asking for the assessment of people with coronavirus in July. We will have a number on that. Now,
got an estimate. So you have started asking for those figures now. So you have got some estimates being done.
We've been asking this consistently because we see on a daily basis internally in the UK the prevalence and number of people in the UK with coronavirus. And that equally applies to the number of people that are coming in from outside of the UK.
So of the 50,000 people currently coming in that you referred to into the UK, what is the government's current estimate of how many of them are likely to be carrying coronavirus?
Well, the estimate, and officials are clear about the estimate on this, and the estimate being the only reliable estimate based on their data sets, is 0.5, and that is the figure that they are consistently using.
Still, for July?
Clarity on that is effectively what I have been presented with in terms of the figure that they are saying is reliable.
But that was a figure for the 23rd of March. That was a figure for the 23rd of March as a percentage of the number of cases in the country. What is the figure for now, today, in July, when we've got different quarantine arrangements in place that presumably are based on some evidence? What is your figure for now? Of that 50,000, what's the government's estimate about the number of those people who are likely to be carrying coronavirus and thereby presumably justifying the quarantine arrangements you have in place?
Well, I have just told you the figure that I have been given as the only reliable estimate. We will ask for that to come to you in writing from a government scientific advisor.
Have you really not had an updated figure since 23rd of March?
No, we have updated figures every day.
So how come the only figure that you've got in your briefing is 0.5%, which is the figure from the 23rd of March?
Based on the data sets that the scientific advisors in government are using.
Okay, can I just ask then, to ask Matthew Rycroft and Shona Dunn, why does the Home Secretary's briefing papers only have a figure from the 23rd of March? Why has she not been given a more up-to-date assessment of the number of cases of coronavirus or the proportion of cases of coronavirus coming into the country?
If I can come in, Chair, the Home Secretary, as you said, has asked and received continually updated estimates of the proportion of cases in the UK that come in from overseas, and that number continues to be up to 0.5%. So
okay,
it's a refreshed number. It happens to be the same upper limit as the number from the 23rd of March, but it is a refreshed advice from stage.
And that still is an assessment of the number of cases in the country. What about the number of cases coming into the country as a proportion of the number of cases arriving at the border? Have you ever had that figure? Mr. Rycroft?
I think that the number that, well, I have nothing further to add to what the Home Secretary and the Second Permanent Secretary have said.
Okay. Well, it is just quite troubling that it seems that none of you are able to explain just an assessment of the number of people likely to be coming into the country with coronavirus or the proportion of the 50,000. We just ask you then just one final question. Scientists are now saying that between 1,300 and 10,000 cases of coronavirus came into the country from mainly Spain and Italy in March, during that period where you weren't asking how many people were coming and during that period where you didn't have any quarantine arrangements in place, and also saying that those figures hugely sped up the epidemic. Do you now regret not having quarantine arrangements in place in March?
Well, first of all, I did ask questions and I did have numbers, as did everybody in government. And secondly, in terms of the measures that were being put in place at the border, we were following the advice, and rightly so, from government advisors. And it was deemed back in March in particular, if you recall, on the 13th of March, that the stay-at-home guidance was more effective than previously issued country-specific advice. And that has been confirmed by our scientific advisor and by SAGE.
I understand that that was the advice you were given at the time, but now in retrospect, those same scientists or similar scientists and advisors to SAGE are saying between 1,300 and 10,000 cases of coronavirus came into the country during that period around March when you had no quarantine arrangements in place. So do you now regret not having quarantine arrangements in place in March?
Well, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but we were following the advice at the time, and I think that is absolutely the right thing to do. And that wasn't just from the Home Office's perspective. This was cross-government. So that was in consultation with not just SAGE, but the Department of Transport, the Department of Health, and every other government department. And if you recall rightly, and I was involved in these meetings at COBRA involving cross-government and the DAs.
Fine. And other countries were obviously doing something very different. So you don't regret not following other countries?
Well, we have to do what we feel was right for our own country.
Thank you very much.
And if you look at other countries like the United States and Italy, their approach obviously has not actually reduced the numbers of COVID going into their country or getting their own domestic outbreak down.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Home Secretary, I want to turn to the issue of Hong Kong because, as you know, successive governments have resisted calls to change the legal rights of British nationals overseas. But the current government's correct view, in my opinion, that the new security law is a clear and serious breach of the Sino-British Joint Declaration. You've extended a right to remain and a path to citizenship to BNOs resident Hong Kong. What analysis has been done to the likely estimate for take-up of this offer?
Well, first of all, we're in the process of doing a great deal of work on this. Now, if I can just explain a couple of aspects to this whole BNO route in particular. Now, you're right in terms of the reasons why we are doing this, because of the national security legislation. This new route will mean that BNOs can enter and remain in the UK with the right to work, study, and can actually lead to a pathway to citizenship. It is a bespoke route. And we are working on implementation. And on that, there is actually a small ministerial group that's working on getting the assessments in potential numbers. So the Foreign Office are leading on a great deal of this work with us. The two of us are working together. We do have assessments effectively because the numbers right now, the estimated number who are eligible for BNO status is 2.9 million people. There are currently 366, just over 366,000 BNO passports in circulation. We're also working, and this is quite important to note actually, with other countries on this too, particularly our Five Eyes counterparts and colleagues who are also saying that they also want to look at the type of route we are introducing and create pathways of a similar nature. So that's obviously Canada, America, Australia, New Zealand are active on this, and the Foreign Secretary is leading on some of the discussions on that particular front. So, you know, we are, in fact, the Foreign Secretary had his discussions just last week on this. We are looking at this right now in terms of getting effective approximate numbers. These will be estimates and approximate numbers. That is something that we're currently working through.
Thank you, Home Secretary. Obviously, you've not got the detail of the proposals yet, but Hong Kong Watch have suggested these could exclude young people, specifically those born after 1997, even though they're more likely than any other group to be the target of the authorities since they've been the most active in the demonstrations. I'm not asking for the detail on the specifics of the scheme now, but can you give assurances on this particular point?
I can give you more than an assurance on this. I mean, I'm actively looking at that particular age group and cohort because, of course, they would have been too young at the time to have been registered as BNOs, and that is what the government has given a clear commitment on that. I am looking at a number of options, and I'll be very happy to come back to the committee in due course to unpack those options and talk about them. We are trying to work through this right now. It is complicated, but we are absolutely giving that commitment very clearly to that particular cohort.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point that you've clarified there. Can I turn now to the issue of borders and specifically of migrant crossings? In January 2019, the British and French governments agreed the Treaty of Sandhurst to improve border security and prevent people crossing the channel in small boats. Migration Watch reports around, I think, 2,300 have successfully crossed to the UK in the first half of 2020. Do you accept those figures?
Yeah, I don't have those in front of me. I see figures on a daily basis, actually, on small boat crossings, because I actually see not just the data, but every single incident report that comes in. What I would say, and I'll be very clear about it, these numbers are just shocking, they're appalling, and they're unacceptably high. Shona Dunn is leading on a team who are working specifically on this. I can also say that as of the 2nd of July, there are 166 arrivals with a Eurodac hit who are ready to be returned to Italy, Germany and France. And we have already made return requests for a further 577 people that have come into the country this year alone. The figures are unacceptable. We have a major problem with these small boats, the route itself. I was in Calais on Sunday morning, and I can tell you right now, we want to end the viability of that route because of other measures that have been brought in place over recent years in the past. Lorry drops, for example, there'll be more measures, more checks at various borders. Even in Belgium, we're working with the Belgian authorities as well to try and stop and prevent facilitation of people trafficking through lorries. This route is incredibly problematic. You know, we cannot sugarcoat it. It is absolutely problematic. I've seen for myself in Calais, you know, along the roads, camps that have been set up, the French authorities through the Sandhurst agreement that has been put in place, clearing camps, but actually all it is leading to is greater displacement. And we have also seen individuals that we have returned back to France, they will still try and come over again. And we've got repeat people who have tried to come over again, which is why, because we do have data on these individuals, we are so persistent in returning them back. The fact of the matter is France is a safe country, Germany is a safe country, Italy is a safe country, and people should be claiming asylum in those countries.
It's all fine and well to say these are unacceptably high figures, but do you consider them to be a success or a failure of the treaty measures?
I think, to be quite frank, I mean, I'm looking to make changes, to be fair and very honest about this. Sandhurst Treaty, when it came in, clearly it was brought in for this very reason. Migrant crossings were taking place, and it was right that we had a bilateral agreement with the French authorities. I think it was good. I think it was important. Let's not forget the French authorities themselves have stopped many migrants from crossing across the months of April and May this year. They've stopped over 1,000 migrants from crossing. That is part of the agreement that was formalised in the Sandhurst Treaty. The practicality is, and the facts are, too many people are still making crossings and leaving France or trying to leave France, and they get over here. We are fundamentally looking at changing ways of working in France. I've had some very, I think it's fair to say, difficult discussions with my French counterpart, even looking at interceptions at sea, because currently the French authorities are not intercepting boats at sea. And by that I mean even boats that have left that are just 250 yards or so away from the French coast. I feel that there could be stronger enforcement measures on the French side, and they've heard that from me. The Sandhurst Treaty, as you know, has invested significant amounts of UK taxpayers' money in security mechanisms, in French police patrols on the beaches, using electronic equipment. They're using all of that. But the scale of this, and let's not forget the scale of the beaches themselves in terms of geography, sand dunes, etc., it is complicated. We are actively in discussions right now. to look at what further actions, potentially, what additional cross-working is required. I would like us to have much more joint working. We have agreed that over the weekend. More intelligence sharing, more data sharing, more use of the NCA data on individuals. But the French system is very different to our system as well. We're slightly more agile and interoperable in the UK across our border forces, NCA, our crime agencies, and the way we pull data together. In France, the system is not geared up to work in that way. That is part of the challenge that we have. But the fact of the matter is, we've got to try and break this route. And to break this route, in my view, we have to intercept boats at sea and return them back to France.
Thank you. Tim Lawton.
Oh,
sorry, go to Tim Lawton. I'll come back to you, Andrew, afterwards, if that's all right. Tim Lawton.
Home Secretary, in terms of the numbers, I think Chris Philp confirmed that there have been 450 people who come across in the first quarter of this year. Those are the ones we know about. I think that figure has probably been exceeded in just the space of the last few weekends with record numbers. He also confirmed that I think some 68.6 million euros have been spent by May on beefing up security with the French, and yet clearly it is not working. Despite the numbers who have been returned, record numbers are still making it into British territorial waters. So can you confirm that you think the French do have the powers, which they claim they don't, to intercept boats at sea, whether it's meters or miles away from the French coast, in French territorial waters, and take them back to French territory, which they're not doing at the moment, and that, frankly, the only way we're going to combat this, if it becomes very clear that you stand a very slim chance of making it across to British land if you are intercepted by either French border force or their equivalent or the UK border force, and that might just deter people from getting in the water and paying people traffickers £4,000 in the first place. Do you agree?
That's absolutely right. That is absolutely right, and that is what we are working to achieve. Right down to sharing legal advice, legal guidance in terms of maritime laws, because let's not forget, a lot of this is governed by maritime laws and the French authorities' interpretations of what they can and can't do at sea. It is our advice that they can go ahead and do that. And that is effectively what the Minister, Chris Philp, is alluding to. That has been part of the discussions that we have been having with the French authorities throughout the entire coronavirus crisis, because it is through the pandemic where the weather has been good. We have seen a surge in the numbers, and we have to end this route. We want to break this route. We want to make this unviable. And in my view, the only way to do this is by intercepting and returning the boats back to France.
Okay, so key to this is if the French did agree, and obviously they have to agree for us physically to be able to land these people trying to cross back on French beaches, that we disagree with the French interpretation of maritime rules is the basis of this problem. And so you had a meeting with your new French counterpart at the weekend. You say that we've had ongoing discussions about this. I believe it was the 𝐒𝐚𝐭𝐫𝐫𝐭 agreement some while ago, which apparently was an informal agreement whereby we could repatriate at sea interceptions back to France. But nothing has ever happened under that agreement, which turns out not to have been worth the gentleman's handshake it was made on.
That is absolutely correct.
And so have you any optimism that your discussions with your new counterpart last weekend might lead to the French actually saying, yes, you can return interceptions at sea? Because surely it's in the French interest to do that, because people are only massing on the beaches, paying people traffickers, because they know that they won't be picked up by the French authorities when they get in the water. And the only way they will be picked up is if they're sinking.
Well, that's absolutely right. And a number of things. I think it's important we have stress tested the 𝐒𝐚𝐭𝐫𝐫𝐭 agreement since last year, again and again and again. In fact, I think one of my officials described it inappropriately as a gentleman's agreement, which is thoroughly inappropriate. Literally just sort of an informal agreement. And the fact of the matter is, these agreements are here to stand the test of time and to be operationalised. So I have pinned the point repeatedly to my French counterparts, but we've gone further than that. We have offered to work with them at sea on joint exercises to demonstrate demonstrate how boats can be returned safely, because the other point to note, Mr. Wharton, it is equally as important, along with maritime law, that we actually prevent loss of life at sea. And many of these individuals who are being trafficked and facilitated, it is incredibly high risk for them to carry on in this way. The French and both the British
to pay these people smugglers.
Mr. Holloway, you're absolutely right. And it seems that very little has changed effectively in the period when you were in Calais, in Sangatte, to the period that we're in now. You'll find that the nationalities may have changed slightly, but effectively they are migrants. They are looking to, I mean, quite frankly, make a new life for themselves in another country. And as I said earlier on, if they were genuine asylum seekers, they would claim asylum in their first safe country, which is France. And let's not forget, many of them have travelled through many other European countries I've already referred to, Germany and Italy, in addition to France, where we will be returning individuals who have transited through those countries. And we are returning people. But the fact of the matter is, France, I'm afraid, northern France, has become, the place where people seek to go to then come to the United Kingdom. And that is why we need to break this route. We have to make this route unviable. In the same way, and hundreds of millions of pounds have been spent over the last 10 years by my predecessors and through different bilateral arrangements as well with French counterparts in putting in more border security, both in France, but also in the United Kingdom, closing down, if you will recall, Mr. Holloway, in 2015, people come, but also through, putting up fencing, but at the same time stopping other routes that were more viable. And the fact of the matter is, I saw it for myself, and the French authorities confirmed this to me on Sunday, that even at night, migrants would attempt to run onto the motorway and jump onto lorries to still try and make that dangerous journey. They're putting themselves at risk, their lives at risk. And, we have to grip this situation, and right now our priority is to make that route unviable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could the Home Office possibly send us some more data on the proportion of those people who are arriving who put in asylum claims, and also the proportion of those asylum claims that are successful and unsuccessful? It would be very helpful to have that data, please. Diane Abbott.
Home Secretary, I wanted to ask you some questions about Windrush, and in particular the compensation arrangements. You did apologise for the Windrush scandal. I was in the chamber and I heard you. But do you appreciate that apologies are worthless if the Home Office is not processing compensation claims in a timely fashion? Wendy Williams herself commented in front of the Joint Committee on Human Rights recently that interim payments should be made much more quickly. We know that only 60 people have received Windrush compensation payouts so far, and that is of over 1,275 people that have applied. We also know that 5 people have died. Do you appreciate the concern about the slowness, the concern, as your Permanent Secretary said the last time, we took evidence from it, that you are doing this in your own good time? People will die before they get what's owed to them. What measures are you prepared to take to speed up the processing of these compensation claims?
Is because we are relying on other government departments to provide information around benefits, or even getting verification from HMRC. Shona will speak to some of that. I'm not ruling out trying to simplify this as well, quite frankly. I can tell you in terms of figures, 1,391 applications have been received by the scheme. A total offer of £1.5 million has been made to 154 individuals. We do have urgent and exceptional payments that have been totaling over £72,000. We have granted, documentation has been granted to over 12,000 individuals, including 509,900 who have been granted citizenship. And also offers, there are still a high number of offers that have been made to individuals. Look, we have to look at how we can make this scheme much more functional. I will also share with the committee, because this comes to the crux of the issue, As of the 1st of July, there were 254 cases that have been with the Home Office that have taken over 12 months to progress, to process even, we've not been able to process them. And these are difficult cases, but importantly, these are the types of cases that I'm trying to unpack right now as to understand as to why they're difficult. Is it as an issue with the, way in which we're asking individuals to provide information? Is it a case of, the level of care that's required, how complicated they are? Because the fact of the matter is, I want people to receive the maximum level of compensation that they are entitled to. So, as I've said, my focus is being very much into the department. You tell me what you need, we will absolutely put the resources in place. That is a near daily discussion that I'm having. But through that 254 cases, I'm now trying to ascertain, why is it taking so long? Are there system issues? Are there process issues? Is it complicated in terms of the requirements that we're putting on individuals? Because let's not forget, the onus is on the individual to provide information. The onus is on the individual to respond to engagement with us. We still need to unpack that. But if I can hand over to Shona, she might want to just build upon some of the work that's going on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Home Secretary. I'm grateful for that. And as Matthew and I both said last week, we are absolutely, as the Home Secretary said, completely committed to speeding this process up as far as we possibly can. And we agree that it is not fast enough at the moment. As the Home Secretary has also said, both Matthew and I have daily conversations to get to the nub of what else of any type of resource or support might move us forward faster. This is an absolute priority for every single one of us. There are a variety of things that we said last week, and I would say again this week, which I think are relevant.
We wait. I'm going to interrupt you. We don't have time to hear again the evidence that we heard from you last week. If there's further evidence that you want to provide for us on the detail of the things that you're doing, please do write. Back to you, Diane.
Apologies. So the key thing I was going to say is
Sorry to interrupt you, Shona. Are you saying the problem is not one of resources?
So, Sabah, I am saying that, as we referred to last week, that there was a stage at the beginning of this process where people needed to work through early claims to work out how to do them fairly and consistently. And we are now building up resources. I beg the question every day, can we build up resources? If we build up resources faster, can we move faster? And as we are learning, the answer is becoming yes. I've got 11 new caseworkers starting on Monday who are already fully trained, and that trajectory will continue week on week from here until I am absolutely satisfied that there is no further margin for speeding anything up. As a consequence of caseworker capacity, and I'm looking at every single element of the process. So,
okay, that's still pretty much the things that we heard from you last time. Thank you, Diane.
Well, just to remind you of a case I raised last time, 𝐒𝐚𝐭𝐫𝐴, who was wrongfully served with removal papers, and at the time she ran just last week. Nothing has changed, nothing has moved. What does it take, really, in reality, for you to speed up dealing with these cases? Can you look at 𝐒𝐚𝐭𝐫𝐴's case again?
Absolutely, Sabah, and I have asked the question about 𝐒𝐚𝐭𝐫𝐴's case, and I have got some caseworking details in front of me. I haven't got all the caseworking details in front of me, but I have absolutely been looking at that case. And I think the key thing to say in that case is that the caseworkers are looking, particularly given the point you made about impact on life, looking at how they can make sure that the compensation that Ms. John receives is as generous as it is conceivably possible for it to be under the terms of the scheme. I have checked that point since last week, and I'm very happy to share further caseworking details with you outside of the session.
Thank you. I want to go on and ask a further question on policing, but before we leave Windrush, on the question of citizenship, Why is citizenship being denied to people who've been allowed to come back as returning residents, but they're being denied citizenship because they've been out of the country so long, but they've been out of the country so long because the Home Office removed them? And the other question is about criminal convictions. And are you really denying citizenship to people for very old criminal convictions and very minor criminal convictions? Ms. Dunn?
So the cases on citizenship, as you rightly say, will often be complex that relate to individuals.
Specific factors. I'm asking about the amount of time you're out of the country, even when it's not your fault, and where you have criminal convictions. Those two specific factors.
And where people have been out of the country for reasons which were clearly not their fault and related to Windrush, that absolutely can be picked up by the task force. And I would expect that to be taken into account in decisions around citizenship. On criminality, I think that the position is clear that the good character test and criminality test is part of the questions around citizenship. If there are very old criminal convictions, I know again that is something that the task force takes into consideration.
Thank you. Ruth Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Home Secretary, I'd like to turn to the issue of policing, if I may. We've heard a lot of conflicting opinions about stop and search. I was wondering what your experience was of engaging with communities around the issue of stop and search, particularly with black and minority ethnic communities.
Well, if I may, I think as someone that spends nearly every single day in this role with representatives from the police, I do want to pay tribute to the police in terms of their conduct and how they have responded, particularly to the deeply challenging times through coronavirus, but also pay tribute to the way in which they have been engaging communities through what has been quite a challenging particular period of time. But specifically to your question around my experience of this issue of stop and search, I have met with victims of knife crime and serious violence many, many times. And I've had the experience of not just seeing, but hearing from those victims. More often, they are mothers and fathers, of the devastating impact that knife crime, violent crime has had on their children. More often than not, that's resulted in the loss of their child. So stop and search, in my view, is a vital tool to protect and prevent further victims of such crime. And I have heard repeatedly from many victims, from parents in particular, from predominantly Afro-Caribbean communities, and very much, I have to say this, across the country. I've heard it more in London, where I've spent more time due to restrictions, obviously, prior to COVID, speaking to individuals who've always said, they've repeatedly said to me, stop and search is working. It could have saved the lives of their child, basically, and more needs to be done to reduce violent crime and get deadly weapons off our streets.
Thank you. It sounds to me like the police are caught a bit between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, they are accused of over-policing communities, and on the other hand, they're told that they don't do enough to stop knife crime and serious violence. So how do you think they can strike the right balance, one that both has the confidence of communities, all communities in the UK, including black and minority ethnic communities, but also tackles serious violence?
Well, I think first of all, we have to remember and reflect upon the model of policing that we have in our country. First and foremost, we have policing by consent. That defines the nature of policing. That is a Pelian principle that has been established for over 200 years. And effectively, the police are part of the communities that they police. They work with community groups and organisations. Every day I have heard of remarkable, a range of really, well, quite frankly, uplifting stories and reports from chief constables and police officers, even throughout coronavirus, of community engagement, proactive engagement as well. The public do want to see police officers actively in their community. But specifically with regards to stop and search, towards the end of last year, we asked the College of Policing to update its guidance when it came to stop and search, to make sure the guidance provided very much, the best practice around community engagement, the right guidance around proportionality, the right guidance around safeguards. That's absolutely right. And that is effectively how the police, they exercise their judgment, they're trained in that way. And the police have my full backing when it comes to the fair and proportionate use of stop and search to tackle serious violence. We've seen a lot of that in terms of, we've seen some horrible scenes around the country, quite frankly, devastating scenes, violent activity where the police themselves have been subject to the most abhorrent and appalling assaults. And of course, the police have to exercise their judgment in every situation. When it came to the protesters we saw, the police were exercising their judgment based on, operational command that was given to them at the time.
Thank you. You mentioned assaults on police officers, and I think we've all been shocked to see the pictures of quite serious injuries caused to police officers who've been policing protests here in London. I know that the government's currently consulting on doubling prison sentences for people who assault any emergency services workers. Do you think this will be enough to help to protect our police officers, but also other emergency services workers? Will it be enough to deter them? And is there anything else we can do apart from increasing sentencing time?
Well, thank you for the question. I think this is really important. We cannot underestimate, and we've seen the pictures on our screens and all the rest of it. We cannot underestimate the level of violence and the assaults that have taken place on our police officers. Last year alone, there was something like 30,000 assaults on our officers. That for me is what I would define as senseless violence being levelled at our brave officers. And it is worse than alarming, quite frankly. The consultation is important, and that is why I urge everyone everyone to participate and engage in it. And the consultation is based on doubling the maximum sentence emergency worker. We want this to be a deterrent. It's right that this should be a deterrent. And if you look through some of the figures that the NPCC have published throughout COVID, they themselves are publishing figures on assaults, but also prosecutions. The CPS themselves stepped up throughout this particular period to tackle the perpetrators of assaults. I do think, quite frankly, that this is an important measure in terms of doubling the maximum sentence. We need a deterrent in the system, and it's there to make, hopefully, people think twice. But at the same time, I think there's much more that is required in general and genuine respect of people that serve our community, that are there on the front line to protect us all from danger and harm. And that's whether you're a police officer, an ambulance worker, or a fire worker, anyone in uniform service. The lack of respect that is shown to them day in, day out for the incredible work that they do, I think is simply not acceptable. And I hope this consultation will go some way to rebalancing some of this.
Thank you. Simon Fell.
Thank you, Chair. Home Secretary, I'd like to move on to the issue of police reform. So Tom Windsor's recent report into the state of policing gives us lots to dig into, but there are some really quite stark recommendations from the Chief Inspector there, both on police funding and also force structures. On the funding point, there's a recommendation about moving away from short-term funding to 3-year funding reviews to enable longer-term planning. I note that the policing minister in the chamber on Monday suggested he was unhappy with the current setup. But on the structure point, there was also a call for the current force arrangements as being no longer fit for purpose, and for closer coordination across local, regional and national groupings of structures. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on these issues, and do you agree with the need for reform?
The answer is I do. I absolutely do. And I've seen that, firsthand. I can say this because I think when I look at the relationship that this government has with policing, our relationship is probably one of the strongest relationships any government has had in decades with policing. It is right that we engage with the police leadership, with the front line, day in, day out, and we are doing that very consistently. And I'm unapologetic for that, because I think it's important that the Home Office and the Home Secretary and a government that believes in law and order stands with our police forces and our police officers. But of course, there is an opportunity to look at what isn't working as effectively as it could do. And that is why the Tom Windsor report is important. And there are a number of points I would like to make on this. I think one of the lessons we have seen throughout this COVID pandemic, fundamentally, because I've been speaking to police chiefs and the police leadership every single day throughout the crisis, we've seen policing work in a very different way. We've seen greater agility, we've seen greater integration, we've seen more support across our forces, we've seen deployments work in a totally different way. When we thought protests could have come earlier, we stood up, cells on protests, and teams are ready to provide mutual aid and all sorts of things. There is much more that can be done in terms of effective ways of working. Perhaps stopping the silo-wise culture that we have seen, that is very much a legacy from the past. But when it comes to reform, this isn't just about money. This is about the outcomes that we want to see. I agree that the funding formula is problematic. It's out of date. It is so complicated. It is so complicated. The policing minister was absolutely right to point this out in the House on Monday. We've already been looking at it. We have been looking at it. But obviously, in terms of our prioritisation right now, with COVID in particular, and the fact that policing has had the biggest financial uplift in over a decade, our priority is to make sure that we're resourcing the police in the right way, not just because of COVID, but actually supporting them on recruitment, getting crime down, focusing through the National Policing Board on, some key outcomes on policing that can make a difference in the community. I should also say, where there is another area for significant change is when it comes to the accountability and the governance of police and crime commissioners. Just last week, I was with one of our fantastic police and crime commissioners in Sussex, 𝐏𝐚𝐭𝐫𝐿, who is transforming policing, driving amazing outcomes on issues such as domestic abuse, for example, pulling together great technology, software, driving outcomes, making sure vulnerable kids are protected. We don't see that level of consistency across all police forces. Now, that's one example. Another example is when you look at London. In London, we are seeing the Police and Crime Commissioner there, go out of his way to cut policing numbers at a time when we are seeing increases in crime. In Derbyshire, I was getting reports.
Okay, I think we're not going to use this Home Affairs evidence session as a reason to choose particular party police and crime commissioners and to make comments on their record. So, Simon Fell.
Thank you, Chair.
I think, Chair, it's important to understand how fragmented policing has become and where accountabilities and responsibilities lie, particularly when it comes to...
I completely understand, Home Secretary, you will have party political views on the performance of individual police and crime commissioners across the country, and you will want to make those points in the run-up to police and crime commissioner elections. However, we have an awful lot to go through and not very many minutes left, so Simon Fell.
Thank you. Last question then, Chair. One of the interesting findings in this report is around mental illness and how often the police are the first responders when they come across people who have mental health issues, alcohol dependency, drug dependency. The report cites Avon and Somerset Constabulary, who, in 70% of the cases they found where they detained someone under the Mental Health Act, they'd met those people before. They are seeing, bearing the brunt of these repeat cases. Obviously, fixing that means joint working across a range of different areas and departments, education, housing, social services, whatever that may be. We've seen a solution to this in the pandemic where local resilience forums to a degree have stepped up and brought those different services together. I'm curious to know what you think the department could learn from that and what policing could learn from that in particular.
So these are absolute touchstone issues because they affect every community around the country. It is a fact, and even throughout COVID, I have been quoted many times saying that policing has become the backstop for society, for some of the wider issues, problems and challenges. We see that across all police forces. That is a fact when it comes to mental health, when service provision is not there. I'm sure you would have seen it yourself in your own constituency. I've been out with my own force, in the past where on weekends, Friday nights, Saturday nights, when mental health facilities are not open and available, effectively it's the police that then step in, and then a whole triaging system then comes together. We have learnt a lot throughout this COVID crisis. You touch on local resilience forums. It's important to reflect that many of the resilience forums, they have a policing structure. They have a gold command, more often than not, led by our chief constables. And our chief constables have done a fantastic job throughout COVID in terms of facilitating and joining up all aspects of the state and society. So that will involve local authorities, health authorities, other key aspects of the state, and that's important. And I bring you back to my earlier point in terms of ways of working. That is one of the key lessons that we have learned from this. And we've also seen greater proactivity. I mean, another good example alongside mental health is domestic abuse. When we looked at throughout COVID, the trends that were materialising in domestic abuse. In fact, it was some of our police and crime commissioners, I mentioned Katie, that's absolutely gripped this. And there are other leads in policing on domestic abuse. They were able to work across the country with other police forces to look at what resources could be put in place, how safeguards could be put in place, but also how they could work with refuges, third-party organisations, providers, local authorities, to join up service provision. Now, we could argue, is that the role of the police? But quite frankly, policing is a very significant pillar in our community that has to deal with many of the problems in these spaces, whether it's mental health or domestic abuse, and they can help to join up with other agencies. So there is more to do there. And I do think, coming back to the Tom Windsor report, there are things that we should look at, and that's the reason why I made the point about police and crime commissioners, because there are things that cross over into their governance structures that also link into the way police forces work, and also the prioritisation of policing priorities, such as, for example, dealing with many of these multi-agency service issues, and how some forces and how some PCCs can work in a different way.
Thank you.
With a new footprint.
Sorry to interrupt, Home Secretary. We have a few other issues we want to cover. Dinah Johnson.
Thank you very much. Home Secretary, I want to just spend a moment looking at your proposals around the new immigration system that you want to introduce, and particularly how it will affect the social care sector. And I'm sure you've seen the comments already from Age UK, the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services, the GMB, Unison, the Royal College of Nursing, who are all really very concerned that at this stage we already have 122,000 vacancies in the social care sector. It's one of the highest turnovers in any sector in the economy, and we know that 66% of EU key workers in health and social care would be ineligible under the skilled worker route. And it's been suggested, in light of the current circumstances with the coronavirus pandemic, that taking the step to exclude care workers from the health and care visa is actually reckless. I wondered what you thought of that, Home Secretary.
Well, I think it's important to put some of this into context. I myself have spent a great deal of time actually in the development of the policy, the development of the points-based system policy, which started last year, in the autumn of last year, and my officials and the immigration minister has done exactly the same as well, in engaging with the profession and the sector. So just to give one example, I've been involved in discussions, as has the Department of Health and Social Care, with the Chief Exec of NHS Employers, the Deputy Director of Development and Employment within the NHS as well, to understand the needs of the social care sector. So we have been working with that sector across government and specifically within the Home Office to understand jobs in the social care sector, the level of skills that are required in terms of qualification, and clearly the skill level at RQF3 level and above will be able to come in through the new skilled worker route. But
sorry, what does that mean specifically? What skill level is that?
That is A-level, the equivalent to A-level and equivalent. Will be able
as a care worker.
To the UK, this is coming to the UK under the new skilled worker route. That has been published as part of the points-based system and is in the detail of what we have published thus far. There are a number of other points that I would like to make specifically to care workers. And also you mentioned, Ms Johnson, about EU citizens who are care workers. We've already guaranteed the rights of many EU citizens who are working in the care sector through the EUSS scheme. We've already granted the rights of 3.4 million EU citizens and their family under that scheme, and that is
they
the
have
biggest.
To have been here 5 years, though. Is that right, Home Secretary? So in order to they have to have been here for 5 years in order to qualify for that, don't they?
It's a qualification process, but 3.4 million have been granted citizenship already. And we have, I think this is really important to emphasise this, because we've also been working with the Migration Advisory Committee on this since last autumn, since literally September last year. And they have specifically said at every stage that immigration is not the solution to addressing staffing levels in the social care sector. And in the discussions that we have had with the social care sector and with the Department of Health and Social Care, the emphasis on both sides, and I was involved in those discussions, has been on the need, first and foremost, to pay people in the social care sector higher wages. I mean, that is absolutely essential and the right thing to do, but also to create a proper career path for them, invest in their training, which is vital, rather than relying on personnel trained from overseas.
And I don't think anybody objects to that. I think the problem is it's seen that there could be a cliff edge coming up, because in order to bring in those higher wages and to have a workforce strategy, that's not going to happen before you introduce this new scheme. So I think that there is an issue about whether transitional arrangements should be introduced to get us over, especially this coming winter, when we know it's likely there'll be even more pressure on this health and social care sector because of coronavirus.
So we've been having these discussions with the sector since last year, and they've been cited on the work of the department, but also on the need to train more people. And I think, to be fair, we are seeing more people being trained in social care within the UK. There are reports and there are particular companies that are specialising in that training. And that'll always help in terms of growing the numbers.
But there's 122,000 vacancies. Sorry, that's my concern, that we already have that.
So look, I understand that concern, and that will take time, but we are, as a government, and this isn't just the Home Office, we are, as a government, you've heard me say, working with the sector, working with the Department of Health and Social Care. And I've always said this since last autumn, since I came into the Home Office, that it's really important that we keep data under review, labour market data per sector. I have been very, very clear and consistent on this, to monitor the pressures in the sector and to work with my colleagues and counterparts across government on this. I've always been very clear about that and open about that. And my colleagues themselves, ranging from social care to the Department of Business to training departments as well, working with the sector, being very specific in saying that they want to prioritise more investment, more training of UK people who can and could work in the social care sector, and to grow that. Now, that's not going to happen overnight. We're the first to admit that and recognise that. It does take time, but we should also be creating that structure in our country to support our own labour market and our own economic sustainability within the social care sector. This is a vital, vital sector. It is a sector that possesses the type of skills that sometimes you can't learn, you can't train for, or just pick up through qualification. You learn those skills through being on the job. So this is something that is very fluid. I've been very clear. We'd always keep labour market data under scrutiny to look at pressures in the sector. But immigration is not necessarily the sole answer, as I've outlined, to just fixing the issue around shortages in certain labour, in certain occupations.
So can I just be clear then, if the vacancy rate climbs after the introduction of the new immigration system in terms of the care sector, you would be minded to look again and to see whether there needed to be some transitional arrangements?
Well, there won't be transitional arrangements. What I will do is work with the Department of Health and Social Care specifically, as we've been doing anyway. We've been doing this throughout the whole coronavirus crisis, to look at the data, any pressures, because obviously when it comes to social care, that's not run centrally through government. That is across every single primary care, care trust, NHS trust across the country. So we would learn from the Department of Health and Social Care where the pressures were, and if there was something that we had to assist them with or give them support on in terms of support for people coming in to work in those sectors, then clearly we would look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Stuart MacDonald.
Thank you. Home Secretary, just to follow up on that point, I agree with what you said twice, that it would take time to reform the social care sector. But why are you embarking on this course now? Right at the height of a global pandemic, we've had warnings of a second wave this winter. You are making it harder, not easier, to get the social care workers that we need. Why on earth are you even contemplating that?
Well, on the contrary, I'm not making it harder. When you look at a number of things, as you've just heard me say, very clearly, we've been working on this policy, the development of a points-based system, since September last year. This is not a new measure at all. And within that, we have been clear in terms of thresholds, tradable points, the need for skills and qualifications to come to the United Kingdom. And you've already heard me outline as well the RQF level and the equivalent, which could come through our new skilled worker route, the points-based system.
But it's a salary level that precludes care workers from vital care workers from coming in.
I've just highlighted the RQF3 level. That is about the skills that people have.
Yeah, but it's a salary level that's the problem. The RQF3 is fine, but it's a salary level.
I think you're missing the point fundamentally about the points-based system, that it is about the qualification, the skills that are required, and also the employer that will sponsor you to come to the United Kingdom to work in a particular sector, including the health sector. And let's not forget as well, earlier on... Are you saying
that your points-based system is going to allow a care worker to come in earning £18,000 or £19,000?
No.
We have effectively said, if you look at the detail, and I'm sure you've read the policy document that was published, there will be
a lot of it, yes.
There will be a system of tradable points, but also a system where employers can...
Well, if you know your system, then tell me, will that system allow a care worker to come in earning £18,000 or £19,000 as most care workers in England and Wales earn?
The answer to that, as you all know, is no. But you've also just heard me spell out very clearly that where there are shortages in the labour market, we will be able to work with employers to fill shortages. I made that quite clear last year. I've said that several times this year. I said that in February when I announced a points-based...
So you are making it harder then, because currently you can recruit care workers at that level from the EEA without any complications at all. Now you have to go through this rigmarole of a visa application and whatever else. And you actually will also have to establish that it's a shortage occupation list. So don't accuse me of not knowing the system. It's you that doesn't know your own system.
Well, actually, I think your point here is that you're fundamentally objecting to the fact that we are ending free movement as a government, and that you'll no longer be able to bring people from the EU.
I also object to the fact that you're going to make it much harder to combat coronavirus in the months ahead than it would otherwise have been. Absolutely nonsensical move. Can I move on to the issue of the TOEIC scandal? I did give you notice that I was asked about this. In March, you told Stephen Timms that you were looking into it. Can you tell us what you've found?
Well, I've been specifically with, and I know you're raising this question on behalf of Stephen Timms MP, we are specifically working with Stephen Timms to understand the issues that he has raised around certain cases, and that is something that the Home Office has picked up, and our Immigration Minister has picked that up.
Okay, that's not exactly comprehensive. Could we get something a little bit more comprehensive?
Well, we're in touch with Mr. Timms directly about this.
Okay. Coming to visa application fees, you talk about wanting to attract the brightest and best. But if I'm one of the brightest and best from France or Germany or Poland, Why on earth would I want to take up a job in Edinburgh or Cardiff or London if I'm going to have to pay 10, 15, 20,000 pounds in an immigration health surcharge, go through an application process and have no guarantee of settlement at the end of it, when I could take up the same job in Dublin or Tallinn or anywhere else in the EEA free of charge, without any visa application and without any uncertainty about my future? How is that attracting the brightest and best?
Well, I think you'll find that when it comes to attracting the brightest and the best, and you'll know with the actual points-based system itself, that the focus is actually on employers acting as the sponsor for that individual. This is about bringing talent over to the United Kingdom to work in many sectors and many firms. And the structure of the points-based system has always been focused on that route of sponsorship, having a job to come to the United Kingdom, and effectively giving people choice. There's an active competition in the world. People choose to go to other countries. That's a choice that they would make.
But to answer my question, I mean, the immigration health surcharge just sticks out like a sore thumb compared to other countries. People in Europe will literally have to pay 10,000, 12,000, 15, depending on their family circumstances, up front to come to the United Kingdom to take up a job, when they can do that same job anywhere in Europe without paying a penny or going through any application process. Why will somebody come to Edinburgh instead of Dublin if they have to pay 20 grand up front for the privilege?
Well, I think that you're conflating a point here, because fundamentally countries offer different health schemes and structures. And don't forget that, the NHS, absolutely, the immigration health surcharge contributes a significant amount of income for the NHS. Now, if you're suggesting that people should come and live and work in, go around the world
and pay their taxes just like everybody else does, yes. But to move on then, so the immigration bill, your department's modelling said that the financial threshold and so on would see a reduction in net migration from the EU of about 70%. But that modelling did not include the impact of fees. Have you done that modelling now?
I can find that out for you.
Yeah, because, if it's a 70% reduction before the impact of fees, then I think we're probably going to see the EEA nationals disappearing like snow off an egg. But
don't forget, we do have the EUSS scheme as well that has already guaranteed the rights of 3.4 million people. And of course, I'm sure yourself and many others are highly critical of that and saying that people would
not at all. I think it's a good scheme, but what I hate is the fact it's not declaratory. Can you tell me when you're going to publish your guidance about who has a reasonable excuse for missing the deadline? Because that's going to be absolutely crucial to making sure that hundreds of thousands of folk are not left in the same situation or a worse situation, the Windrush generation. When's that guidance going to be published?
To the EUSS scheme?
Yep, there's supposed to be guidance getting published, yeah.
So on the scheme itself, as you know, the scheme is, it's a 3-step scheme. In terms of publishing guidance, of course, there's a lot of work that's already taken place in terms of outreach to communities around the country. So we updated guidance around this because of COVID. We have been hindered in getting out and about to have our engagement events because of COVID. Yeah. And of course, as we return back to normality, we will be able to go back and highlight through the, not just Resolution Centre, but many of the voluntary organisations and community organisations.
But quite specifically, I think you said in your own correspondence with us that there would be guidance published that sets out what the Home Office will consider as a reasonable excuse for missing the deadline, and therefore...
Yes, well, we haven't given a date for that just yet, because obviously we are not at the stage, primarily because everything we've been doing around EUSS in terms of our own outreach and engagement, we've been following public health guidance right now, and obviously, many of our touch points, events, etc., have not been able to take place.
My final question then is, almost exactly a year ago, your predecessor told the House of Commons that the recommended pilot scheme to encourage migration to rural areas was an idea worth pursuing and that further details would be given in due course. Why has that been ditched?
We've been focused on the points-based system.
So
we have
is
one
it ditched?
for the whole of the United Kingdom.
Yes, but 𝐒𝐻𝐸𝐺 said that there would be this pilot scheme. Is that going to happen?
Well, we now have a points-based system that will be coming in from the 1st of January. That is a fundamentally different system to the one that my predecessor was alluding to and discussing back then.
No, it's almost exactly the same. It's exactly the same as the one that was proposed by Theresa May, but 3 years ago.
A very different points-based system.
Okay, we have just a couple of final quick clarifying questions. Can you confirm that care workers, including care workers who are here at the moment, when they renew their visas, will have to pay the immigration health surcharge up front?
Yeah, we've got quite a lot of work taking place on changes to the immigration health surcharge, as you know. From the 1st of October, we're introducing a new, we've got quite a few changes coming on with regards to the health surcharge. So I think the best thing that I should do is perhaps provide you with a timeline of those changes.
That would be really helpful. The things I'm just trying to clarify is, as I understand, they are not included in the health and social care visa. Sorry, the health and care visa. Social care workers are not included in the health and care visa. So only people who are in the health and care visa won't have to pay the immigration surcharge up front. That means care workers will have to pay the immigration surcharge of thousands of pounds, them and their family, up front. Is that correct?
Well, we're in the process of working with the Department of Health around the route that we are taking with care workers. As I've said before, I said it earlier on, I've said it previously, when it comes to care workers, we still have to identify many of them in this complicated system because they don't necessarily come to us automatically via an immigration route. So we're in the process, and I can outline that for you because there's a great deal of work that has taken place on this. But
I'm just checking paragraph 61 of the document, the points-based immigration system document says, frontline workers in the health and social care sector who are not eligible for the new health and care visa, that means care workers, will pay the immigration surcharge, but will benefit from a reimbursement scheme. So can you just confirm what that sentence says? Care workers will have to pay the immigration surcharge up front.
So NHS workers, health and social care professionals who are not eligible for the health and care visa refund, they can apply for the immigration health surcharge reimbursement by the Department of Health and Social Care.
Fine, so they will have to pay it up front. I just wanted to clarify, can you just say yes or no, will they have to pay it up front?
No, that's clear, yes, they do.
Fine, thank you.
As I've said, we will outline this to you in terms of the process.
Final very quick question from Diane Abbott.
I just wanted to ask you, Home Secretary, about the disproportionate use of force by the police against black people. The figures tell their own story. In 2018 to 2019, 15.7% of all police uses of force related to black people, despite the fact we're only 3.3% of the population. And the rate was even higher in the Metropolitan Police. 37% of uses of force were against black people, although the black population is only 13.3%. And you'll be aware there's been some troubling incidents recently, including a young couple who happened to be professional athletes who were taken out of their car and handcuffed in front of their baby who was in the back seat. On the particular issue of tasers, you'll be aware that nationally 20% of incidents in which a taser was used involved black people, but you'll also be aware that in April, several members of the NPCC's National Taser Stakeholder Advisory Group resigned because they said the NPCC wasn't taking disproportionality seriously, and the IOPC is also looking at this. In September of last year, the Home Office gave police forces 10 million to increase the number of officers carrying tasers. When you made that decision,